Picture this, a five-star hotel room overlooking the city. Through the glass, red and blue emergency lights paint everything in alternating colors. Inside, a man stands frozen. His name is Marcus, though that doesn't matter much anymore. What matters is his hands won't stop trembling, and the sirens outside keep getting closer. 6 months ago, Marcus was nobody. He mixed drinks for other people's celebrations, watched customers stumble out with memories he'd never have. He had $47 in his bank account and a wardrobe from clearance racks. He was forgettable, the kind of person waitresses forgot to thank. Then came February. One ordinary night. One extraordinary mistake by a machine. That mistake changed everything. It gave him private aircraft, champagne that cost more than monthly rent, hotel suites where you could lose yourself for hours. It turned him into someone people wanted to know. It made him dangerous in ways he didn't understand until it was far too late. The sirens continue wailing outside. Someone pounds on the door. This is where the story ends, but the real question is how it began. How does a regular person crack the financial system? And once they do, what makes them think they can keep getting away with it? 300 kilometers from the nearest major city lies Springvale, a town where nothing much happens, and most people prefer it that way. The kind of place where everyone knows your business, which is exactly why Marcus preferred working nights. It was early Friday morning, technically Saturday if you wanted to get technical about it. Marcus had clocked out of the Crown at 1:47 a.m. after pouring the last round for the last group of regulars. His shift supervisor had already left. The bar manager was counting the till. Nobody was paying attention to the 29-year-old in a wrinkled shirt heading toward the door. His bank balance was a problem that had followed him into adulthood like a persistent shadow. Rent consumed everything. Groceries took what rent left behind. His car insurance was overdue. He had perhaps $30 in actual cash, the tips from a slow night, and the drunken optimism that comes from midnight walks through empty streets. There's a 24-hour ATM on the corner of Riverside and Main. Marcus had never used it for anything except confirming how broke he was. Tonight felt different, though he couldn't articulate why. Maybe it was the particular quality of the darkness. Maybe it was the beer coursing through his system. Maybe he was just tired of accepting his circumstances. He inserted his card. The interface flickered, not unusual for aging machines, and displayed a message he'd never encountered before. System temporarily unavailable. Please try again. A second message followed. Balance verification error. Most people would have shrugged and walked away. Marcus almost did exactly that. But something about the sequence of errors nagged at him. Not in any logical way. More like how a particular song will stick in your head even after you've stopped listening. He removed his card and tried again. This time, the machine cycled through different screens. For a fraction of a second, maybe half a second, he glimpsed something on the display. A number. His actual balance, he assumed, though it seemed to flash away before he could process it clearly. The machine then offered its standard menu: withdrawal, deposit, transfer, balance inquiry. The beer had definitely been a factor in what happened next. Marcus wasn't naturally brave, but alcohol creates a particular kind of recklessness, not the exciting kind, just the kind that makes you do things you'll regret. He selected transfer. The machine asked him which accounts to move money between. He owned exactly one account, So this seemed deliberately absurd, like the ATM was testing his stupidity. He decided to see how far the test could go. He requested a transfer of $150 from his credit account to his savings. The machine processed for several seconds. Then it rejected the request. He tried $100. Rejected. He tried $50. The machine actually began the transaction this time. He could hear the mechanical whirring inside the device, the sound of something moving, something transferring. And then it stopped. The screen displayed, "Transaction canceled. No funds available." At this point, a normal person would have gone home. Marcus, emboldened by failure and cheap beer, decided to test something else. He requested a cash withdrawal instead, $50. A tiny amount. Something he almost deserved. The machine paused. Then it began dispensing cash. $50 emerged from the slot. Real money. Real bills with actual value. Marcus stood there looking at the bills in his hand, the way someone might stare at a lottery ticket they just pulled from their pocket weeks later. This shouldn't have worked. His account had no money. He had no credit to draw from. And yet the machine had given him cash anyway. He walked down the street in a daze, the $50 feeling impossibly heavy in his pocket. The rest of the weekend crawled by. Marcus couldn't concentrate on anything. At work, he fumbled orders and forgot to charge tables. His manager asked if he was getting sick. He nearly confessed to what he'd done. Not the theft. He didn't think of it as theft yet, more like an inexplicable gift, but managed to stay quiet. Saturday night, he couldn't stay away. The $50 had burned a hole in his consciousness. Back to the same ATM, same corner, same flickering lights. The machine still seemed to have the glitch. This time, he was methodical. He tried requesting a transfer of $200, then waited to see what the machine would do. It processed the transfer without resistance. With his phantom credit transferred to his phantom savings, he then requested a withdrawal. The machine spat out $200 like it had been waiting for him. Marcus walked home with his hands shaking harder than before. He wasn't hallucinating. This was real. By Monday, he'd stopped pretending to himself that this was some accidental luck. The pattern was repeating. Every night around 1 a.m., the banking system seemed to lose track of him. The software glitched. The checks didn't run. Money appeared when it shouldn't exist. He kept a meticulous journal on his phone, recording times and amounts. Monday, $200 withdrawal. Tuesday, $300 withdrawal. Wednesday, $500 withdrawal and transfer. Thursday, $800 withdrawal. By Friday of the first week, he had accumulated almost $3,000. The bank sent an automated fraud alert asking if he'd authorized a large hotel reservation in Brisbane. He confirmed it immediately, lying into the phone to the automated system like the machine might somehow detect deception through the line. He was already starting to rationalize it. The system was broke. He was simply revealing a flaw. It wasn't stealing if the machine was giving it freely. The bank was a massive institution with insurance. They wouldn't miss a few $1,000s. These were the stories he told himself while the machine kept giving. By week 3, Marcus had moved beyond testing the glitch and into exploiting it with scientific precision. He'd learned the system. Between 1 and 3 a.m., the banking network went into some kind of maintenance cycle. The regular checks and balances didn't apply. The machine would accept transfers that made no mathematical sense. The security protocols hung suspended like a held breath. He started writing formulas in that same phone journal. If he withdrew X tonight, he could cover it with phantom transfers tomorrow night. As long as he stayed ahead of the system's daily reconciliation, the glitch would never catch him. It was like playing chess against a computer that was running on delay. His bank balance began climbing in ways that would have normally triggered immediate investigation. Within 4 weeks, his savings account reflected over $100,000. After 6 weeks, $500,000. After 2 months, the number that stared back at him from his phone screen was over $1.2 million. He'd become addicted not to the money itself, but to the impossible sensation of making it. Each night felt like he was solving a puzzle the financial system had left unsolved. Each transaction was proof of concept. Each successful withdrawal validated his mastery over something vast and supposedly secure. The bartender job became insulting. He'd stand there pouring drinks for people, listening to their complaints about money and ambition, and he'd think about the 8 figures growing in his account. He didn't quit immediately. That would draw attention. Instead, he started calling in sick. He was exploring business opportunities. He was taking some time to think about his future. By month 3, he'd simply stopped showing up. Nobody from work ever called to ask what happened. Wealth, Marcus discovered, changes how people see you before you even see it changing yourself. He'd never flown first class. The experience was absurd. Wider seats, better champagne, flight attendants who called him by his name without him providing it. He booked an expensive resort in Bali for a long weekend, paid for the entire top floor of a private villa, and discovered that luxury feels better when you're not supposed to afford it. The staff treated him like royalty. The bartenders mixed cocktails with techniques he'd never seen behind the Crown's dive bar. He ordered expensive wines and pretended to understand them. He tipped in ways that made people gasp. A $500 tip for a simple dinner reservation. A $2,000 tip for valet parking. Back in the city, he rented a penthouse in the financial district. Modern architecture. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a kitchen he'd never use. He furnished it with designer pieces selected by an interior decorator who didn't even ask about budget. He'd never asked about budget either. He became a mysterious figure in upscale bars. Always alone, but somehow always at the center of attention. He'd walk in, and waitstaff would suddenly become attentive. Other customers would notice him. Women would seem to appear beside him without ever having approached. Money, he'd come to understand, is invisible until you have it. Then suddenly you're visible everywhere. He'd meet someone at a bar, a stranger, really, and mention a problem they were facing. A medical bill for their mother. College tuition they couldn't afford. A mortgage payment due. And before they could even fully articulate the problem, Marcus would be pulling out his phone, arranging transfers, and watching their face transform from casual conversation to complete shock. Why? They'd always ask. Because I can, he'd say. And there was the intoxication right there. Not the wealth itself, but the power it represented. The power to change someone's day, to solve their problems, to be the person who saves the moment in other people's stories. He'd spent his life invisible, unimportant, forgettable. Now he was unforgettable. His childhood friend Devin mentioned struggling with rent after a job loss. Marcus transferred $50,000 to his account before Devin even finished explaining the situation. When Devin asked him to please explain where this had come from, Marcus made up a story about cryptocurrency investments. It was convincing because the answer didn't matter. What mattered was the gratitude, the loyalty. The way Devin started introducing him at parties as my friend who's doing really well for himself. He wasn't Marcus, the bartender, anymore. He was Marcus with the private jet connection. Marcus, who knew people. Marcus, who could make things happen. His text messages got answered immediately now. His phone calls got returned within minutes. His opinions seemed to matter to people who'd previously overlooked him entirely. The dark side of this new existence showed itself in smaller ways at first. The tremor in his hands that got worse when he wasn't actively spending money. The dreams that started around week 7. The way certain songs could suddenly make his chest tight with anxiety. The conversations he'd have with himself in the mirror about what he'd become. One night at a downtown club, his old bar colleague Sarah appeared, someone he used to flirt with and who'd barely acknowledged his existence. Now she was suddenly interested in everything he had to say. She laughed at his jokes. She touched his arm when she spoke. She suggested going back to his place. In that moment, Marcus understood something terrible. She wasn't interested in him. She was interested in the money she could detect, like an animal smells blood in water. And somehow knowing this didn't make him push her away. It made him want her to want him even more. By month 4, something shifted inside Marcus's mind. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a single moment of clarity. It was more like a persistent shadow that began growing longer each day. The money itself became meaningless. He'd spend $40,000 on a single night without even checking his balance the next day. But the spending didn't create the high anymore. Nothing did. The penthouse felt empty, even when filled with people. The private jets were just transportation. The champagne all tasted vaguely the same. What consumed his thoughts was fear. Every phone call might be from the bank. Every notification might be the authorities. He developed a habit of checking news websites every morning, searching his own name plus fraud plus arrest plus investigation. Nothing yet, but the yet did heavy work in his mind. He'd lie awake at 3 a.m., the exact hour when the ATM stopped obeying him, and feel his heart doing strange things in his chest. He'd sometimes feel the panic starting and wouldn't be able to stop it, just watch himself spiral into terror about sirens and handcuffs and police custody. His conscience, which he'd thought he'd successfully suppressed, turned out to have just been hiding. It came back with intensity he couldn't manage. He'd think about the bank's employees who might have been blamed for the missing money. He'd think about the security team scrambling to explain how over $1 million had vanished from accounts. He'd think about customers whose transactions were affected because of what he'd done. Around month 4, the bank's fraud department finally called. Marcus nearly had a cardiac episode at the sound of their voice. But they weren't calling about the missing money. They were calling about the $8,000 hotel charge in Melbourne. "Did you authorize this purchase?" they asked. "Yes," Marcus said, his voice unsteady. "That was me." "And the champagne charges? The jet charges? The wire transfers?" "Yes, all of it." There was a pause. "Just being thorough," the representative said. Your account shows high-value transactions, but everything appears in order. Thank you for confirming. They hung up. That was it. The conversation should have relieved him. Instead, it terrified him more. They still didn't understand what had happened. They still hadn't figured it out, which meant they were still investigating, which meant the case was building, which meant when they finally did figure it out, the charges would be worse. By June, Marcus couldn't sustain the performance anymore. He'd been living as two completely different people, the lavish spender and the terrified criminal. The psychological toll was reshaping him into someone he didn't recognize. One night, instead of heading to the ATM, he called his bank manager directly. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold the phone. He tried to explain what he'd done. He tried to apologize. He offered to return the remaining funds. He wanted it to be over. The manager's response was immediate and clear. This is now a police matter. We cannot discuss this further. The line went dead. Marcus waited in his penthouse for the sirens. They didn't come that day, or the next week. The silence was somehow worse than arrest would have been. He imagined every scenario simultaneously. They were building a case, documenting every transaction, constructing charges that would put him away for years. His lawyer would cost more money than he had in legally obtained funds. His trial would be public. His name would be in the news. He couldn't take the uncertainty. In 2013, 2 years after the initial glitch, Marcus did something reckless again. He contacted a news agency and told them the whole story. He went on national television and explained exactly how he'd done it. He actually demonstrated the transfers on camera. He was effectively confessing to everyone simultaneously and daring the authorities to respond. They did respond. The arrest happened within days. The trial was complicated because the crime was so unusual that even the legal system seemed to struggle categorizing it. He'd stolen money that technically never existed. He'd exploited a system glitch rather than hacking in the traditional sense. The prosecutor had difficulty explaining to the jury what had actually transpired. Marcus pleaded guilty, not because the evidence was overwhelming, but because it was true. He sat in the courtroom and watched the judge struggle through the specifics. Even the judicial system couldn't quite grasp what he'd done or how he'd done it. The sentence was 1 year in prison plus 18 months of community corrections. He served his time in a facility where nobody initially recognized who he was. Gradually, some other inmates figured it out. The ATM guy, the bartender who hacked the bank. He was simultaneously famous and invisible, even inside prison. When he was released, Marcus was different. Not reformed exactly. More accurately, just exhausted. The person who'd been seduced by infinite money was gone. The person who'd enjoyed being celebrated was gone. The person who'd felt powerful dispensing wealth to strangers had been burned away by 18 months of reflection and regret. His first job after release was back at a bar. Not the same bar where he'd started, a different one. His first night back, an older man who'd followed the case came in. He recognized Marcus immediately. The man ordered a drink and, when Marcus brought it, slid a $20 bill across the bar. "I thought that was funny," the man said, gesturing to the 20. "That I'm giving you money I earned the hard way. After what happened with yours." Marcus laughed. It was the first genuine laugh he'd had in years. The money he'd spent was gone. The memories he'd thought would last a lifetime had faded to something almost surreal, like a fever dream someone else had told him about. The friendships he'd purchased with his phantom wealth had evaporated the moment the fountain dried up. The reputation he'd built was now attached to infamy rather than admiration. What remained was just a bartender. 34 years old, no longer broke, but no longer wealthy, just ordinary again. And after everything that had happened, ordinary felt like the greatest luxury he could imagine. The glitch in the system had been real. The money had been real. The consequences had been real. But the most real thing of all was the lesson it had burned into him, that easy money leaves a harder price tag than anyone ever suspects, and that the person you become when you believe you can do anything without consequences is someone you probably won't want to know. The system he'd cheated had been finite. His arrogance had been infinite. The mathematics worked out exactly as they had to. And now he understood something he should have always known. You can exploit a system, but you cannot exploit time. Eventually, everything catches up. He was catching up to himself now, one $20 tip at a time.